So I'm going to start. Good morning to all of those who join us today from Brazil, and good afternoon to you in the UK. It really gives me a great pleasure to open this webinar today because not long ago, I wrote to our members informing that the Chamber, wishing to be a very inclusive organization for the benefit of our members, would be creating team-based committees. This idea was to draw on the vast expertise of our members and to share their knowledge with our other members and with the public at large. By doing that, when bringing institutional information and discussing trade and investments opportunities both in Brazil and in the United Kingdom, we aimed at backing our main objective as a Chamber of Commerce, which is to promote trade and economic relations between Brazil and the UK. So today, only a few months later, this is a reality, and we have created at the Chamber the Energy and Decarbonization Committee, the Legal Committee, and the Tax Committee, with the Banking and FinTech Committee being presently in formation. So if you are a member of the Chamber, I would like to encourage you to get in touch and join the committee in your area of expertise. And if you're not a member of the Chamber yet, I hope you will enjoy the event with us today and will consider joining us. But today, of course, is about our newly formed Tax Committee. And I would like to congratulate Gustavo Braga, not only on its formation, but also for gathering for this first event a first-class team, as you will see, that will be talking about an important topic, which is Brazil joining OECD and the related tax issues. As we know, on the 25th of January this year, the OECD Council decided to open accession discussions with Brazil, following, as OECD themselves have said, careful deliberation of its members. Brazil is not new to the OECD and has been engaged with it since 1994, having become a key partner of the organization in 2007 and having also participated in a number of projects within OECD. This entry, as we know, will require on Brazil's part convergence to OECD's policies and legal instruments. Our speakers today will be analyzing the possible implications to taxation rules presently applying in Brazil, resulting from this process. I am very grateful for the time of our speakers for sharing their expertise with us today, and I very much look forward to hearing what they have to say. But just before I ask Gustavo to open our webinar today, I would like to say a few words on our housekeeping rules. So I would ask you please to keep your microphone muted and your camera switched off. There will be a question and answer session later on today, and the questions can be asked via the Teams chat box. So please feel free to type and send your questions to our speakers during the whole time of our webinar. Also, I would also like to note that this webinar is being recorded and that the recording of this session will be posted in the Chamber's website and social media platforms in the next few days. So you are welcome to see it again or to mention to your colleagues and friends in case they are interested. And of course, as I have just mentioned, now if you do not wish to appear in the recording, please make sure that your camera is switched off during the whole webinar. So with that said, I would ask Gustavo to start our works today. Thank you.
Most welcome, Vera. My pleasure. So a big welcome to the first webinar organized by the Tax Committee of the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain. Thank you, President Vera, for the kind words. Thank you, committee colleagues, our learned panelists, and of course, thank you all attending today. We're here to discuss the tax implications of Brazil eventually joining OECD. We shall have the important information about today's topic coming from our panelists. But before, I'd just like to contextualize this debate with two quick questions. First, why should Brazil bother increasing multilateral initiatives, multilateral trade? Well, history proves that multilateral trade and business do promote economic and social development. This is a fact, it's undeniable. So second question, why OECD? Other groups have their own merits towards enabling multilateral relations, like CPLP, the Community of Portuguese-Speaking Countries, and a common language being certainly a great driver for integration. Some critics even refer to OECD as quote-unquote the rich countries club. However, Brazil is the 12th largest economy in the world, so by this measure, richer than the vast majority of other nations. Sure, it is irrational to compare Brazil with Monaco or Singapore, which are very tiny and very rich countries, and also OECD members. To make comparisons proper, I've brought one slide to share with you today. Let me do this. Okay, so this is a cover slide, so technically two slides. But the slide I'll show you right after this one lists the 20 highest populated countries in the world, a very diverse bunch, geographically and ethnically. And they all jointly face the challenges of how to address the needs of a huge population. We're talking about 70 million plus people each, up to the hundreds and even billions, as you know, often within a huge territory. And I list these 20 countries, the 20 largest, highest populated countries. I rank them by GDP per capita, as per World Bank data. And I also considering the purchasing power index, which is used by Google based on surveys made by Numbeo, focus on family expenditure, cost of living in each country, etc. There you go. Okay, well, I did have to shoehorn so much data to keep this list whole and in one slide. But as you can see, these figures, they speak loud and clear by themselves. That if you intend to achieve social and economic development via multilateral relations, well, ideological considerations aside, you should focus on countries at the top of this table with high GDP per capita, high purchasing power. And as you can see, these two indicators, their rankings virtually coincide, with the notable exception of India, its purchasing power index being higher than Russia despite far lower GDP per capita. The same feature to some extent applying to Pakistan and Bangladesh, which PPI is in the same league as Brazil. In short, among countries facing similar large population issues as Brazil is, it's almost a matter of logic to willing to sit on the same table as the countries ticked in green on this list, namely OECD members. The slides are off now, right? No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
No. Okay, there you go.
Not yet, yes.
All right, so can you see me now again?
Yes, we can, Gustavo.
Okay. Right. So uh, there you go. It makes sense to uh, evolve towards increasing multilateral relations with OECD. And but of course, as our panelists will detail, this convergence process shall bring its own challenges. One of the obstacles to be tackled being tax rules. Brazil is already a great destination for investment, rest assured. But being myself a tax practitioner for more than 30 years, most of the time advising long-term foreign direct investment projects, I can testify that whatever can be done to make Brazilian tax system more harmonic with prevailing worldwide practice is more than welcome. And on the welcome note, I invite now Marcio Oliveira to share with us his views on the subject. Francisco Lisboa Moreira will speak after him. Fabio Gaspar, my colleague and vice chair of the tax committee, will mediate this debate. I'll leave it to him to introduce Francisco. And about Marcio, he has a master's degree in accounting at Focap Business School, an MBA in oil and gas with FGV, and he graduated as an economist at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He's a tax partner of EY Brazil, head of transfer pricing, and EY leader for tax for energy in Brazil. Welcome, Marcio. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, everybody. So, firstly, I will try to share my screen. A minute, please. Okay. You can see? Yes, great.
Yes, perfect.
So, firstly, I'd like to thank you to the entire Brazilian Rich Chamber board for this kind of invitation, especially to you, Gustavo, an old friend. So the work that Brazilian Rich Chamber has been doing in spreading technology over the last few years is fantastic. So in this presentation, I will talk a little bit about the Brazil process to join the OECD. In this context, we need to keep in mind that, as Vera said in the beginning, that the OECD is an organization for rich countries, whose the guideline is focused on rich countries. However, in the last few years, this picture has been changing. And the OECD has shown a great flexibility in review some of its rules to accommodate countries like Brazil. In those few minutes, I will try to provide an overview about this process and link this process with some transfer pricing aspects. Okay, I will jump to the next slide here. So the Brazil has been approaching to the OECD since 1990. And in the last January, we have a good news that because we received the formal invitation to start our process of joining to the organization. It was important to remember that Brazil is not, despite the Brazil is not an OECD member, we are considering a key partner alongside China, India, South Africa, and Indonesia. It's interesting to note that those countries, except Indonesia, are BRIC countries. Russia, of course, is out since Russia tried to invade the Crimea in 2014. Russia was put outside this process. But the BRICS, it's interesting to note that the BRICS countries does not take part of the OECD. Brazil will be the first one to have to ascend to the organization if we have success in our process. Okay, it's interesting to note that it's interesting to highlight why it's good to Brazil to join to OECD. So we have many different reasons. So we have the opportunity to discuss the best practice in regarding global public policy in a multilateral context. It's very important. So we'll learn a lot with the experience with other countries. We'll have access to a huge databases. So it could be considered a not so relevant issue, but it's very relevant because based on those information, we'll be able to design public policies better than we have today. So our government will have access of the creme de la creme of the database and the economic informations. Another important issue regarding the potential accession to the OECD is regarding to the possibility to improving the environment for doing business. So it's essential. Brazil lost the stamp of a good country for making business, and we're trying to move in this direction again. Once Brazil ascended to the OECD, it could be a crystal clear signal that Brazil is committed to the best international practice, and it could be attracting investments. It's very important to have this in mind. So comparing Brazil with other countries comparing Brazil with the other key partners, so we can see that Brazil is in a very good position. So basically, to the ascent to the OECD, a country needed to be in compliance with some OECD instruments. Those instruments could be decisions, recommendations, substantive outcome documents, international agreements. Brazil is in compliance with 116 instruments. When we compare this with Indonesia, South Africa, India, and China, so we are light years far for those countries. So it's very positive from our perspective. And this increase of instruments, these instruments in Brazil was increased since 2019. So since then, we practically doubled the number of instruments that we are in compliance. With the other countries that also intended to ascend to the OECD, like Romania, Argentina, Peru, Bulgaria, and Croatia. So we are also in a good position. Compared with Romania and Argentina, we are in compliance with a double of instruments those then countries. So it's very important. We can say that Brazil today is the country, the non-OECD member that is in compliance with more instruments in the world. So it's a very positive issue in our process of ascensions to the OECD. However, so we have some challenges. So we need to keep this in mind. And which are those challenges? So we have many, but here I'd like to highlight just two: environment and economic freedom. In relation to the environment, although there are important concerns, it's important to emphasize that of the 92 instruments that deal with the environment matter, we already have federal laws that fully or partially cover 56 of those instruments. However, apparently it's not enough, and over the next 5 years, so the time needed to complete the accession process, Brazil will have to demonstrate its real commitment to the environment, and this it's clear and this is clear when we take in consideration, for instance, the recently France government notes. So France government told that Brazil will be that the Brazilian entrance to the OECD will depend on serious, concrete, and measurable progress in the fight against deforestation and the climate change. Okay, it's true. Okay, but when we put focus and light over this issue, and we compare our aspects regarding environment with even with some OECD countries, we are not in a bad position. Of course, in the last few years, we have an erosion of this position, but we are not in a bad position. Okay, but this could be an important issue in this process, in the process to ascend to the OECD. Okay. My perception, so, is that our main point, our main concern regarding regarding the OECD ascension, the Brazilian OECD ascension, is related to the economics freedom. So here we're not a good position. So here I'm bringing to you a study prepared by the Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation publishes annually an index of economic freedom, and we are together countries like Ghana, Gabon, and Haiti. We are in the group of the mostly unfree countries. Okay, it's curious because Brazil is the top 10 economy in the world, but the economic freedom is not your reality here. So let's take this in mind. So let's imagine if Brazil had more economic freedom. So considering our potential, our economic potential, our population, so our natural resources, so our resources in general, so would be jump quickly to the other positions. Some Latin American countries are in a much better position. Let's take here Chile, Uruguay, Peru. So those countries are in a better position. This could be an issue to ascend to the OECD. So in this context, so we have some important issues. So the first one is regarding the fiscal health. Okay, so we need to improve our public accounts. So today, okay, the pandemic affects this a lot, but the fact that we need to have a better control about the public account. The government deficit and our debts are too high. So, and we need reforms, some reforms quickly. The administrative reforms, it would be very useful in this process. So it's, in my opinion, so it is essential in this process. Another issue that you need to take in mind, and we are also not in a good position too, is regarding the judicial effectiveness. Here we have a link with the making a link with a tax. We have an issue regarding tax certainty. So if you do not have a judicial effect, if you do not have a judicial effectiveness, so it's very difficult to make business in any country, especially in Brazil. So here we live this each day, and we know how difficult it is to open and to close a company, how difficult it is to keep in compliance with the tax, so the tax aspect. So it's a point that you need to increase too. Corruption, okay. So it's not necessary to talk so much about this. So we need to improve this, and it's essential to the OECD. It's an issue that OECD considering in your analysis. Labor freedom, it's relevant too. Okay, and here we have a challenge because we need to improve our labor freedom, but you need to keep the rights that the labor has today. So how to balance this is very difficult from an economic perspective and also from a political perspective too. And finally, but not less important, but not least, we need to review the tax structure, okay, which is currently heavily focused on taxation on consumption. In general, OECD countries concentrate most of their tax burden on income taxation. We need to make this transition from taxation on consumption to income carefully, without implying an increase of in an increase in the share of taxation on GDP. So that's very important, because today, when we take a look on the tax reform proposal, so in the end of the day, we probably would have an increase of the share of taxation in the GDP. It's not so good from a business perspective. Okay. So, and of course, transfer price is in this context. So when we finally talk a little bit about transfer pricing, so it's an important issue related to the income tax and the income tax, it's a relevant issue regarding income tax to the corporates. From a transfer pricing perspective, so we could talk a lot about many issues here. But I'd like at this space to keep focus basically in two aspects. Okay, the first aspect is regarding the level of judgments that we would have when we talk transfer pricing from a OECD perspective. Okay, we need to remember that Brazil will be the first country in the history to migrate from a completely different TP model to the OECD model. The other countries that migrate, that are sent to the OECD, already applied the OECD guideline. Brazil will be the first one to make a radical movement in this direction. For that reason, we would have additional challenges in this direction. And the first one is regarding the judgment, because our rules today do not require much judgment on the part of the taxpayer for their application. A situation totally different from the OECD rules, where judgment is present at all levels of a documentation process. For example, so let's take the function risk analysis. So we need to evaluate the weight of each function and risk assumed by each party in the transaction. Okay. This judgment could be different between the taxpayer and the Brazilian IRS and the tax authority. So when we discuss the selection of test party, it's the same. Here, we usually do not have, we probably will not have relevant discussions, but it's an issue. TP method selection. So in the OECD, the taxpayer must to select the best method for the transaction. The method that fit better for this transaction. Here in Brazil, so today we have, except for P6 and PCI, the methods for commodities, but for the other circumstance, the taxpayer can choose freely the method. The selection of the profit index. So which profit index is better for one specific transaction? Return on asset, gross margin, operational margin, markup on total cost. So it depends again of a level of judgment. Selection of comparables. Which comparable is better? Which database is better? What kind of guarantee we would have that the taxpayer database will be equivalent, equal of the databases used by the tax authority in your inspections? Okay, we have in the transfer price literature a case in Panama when the taxpayer used a different database than the tax authority and had an issue for that. So we have also a certain level of judgment when we perform comparability adjustments. So we could have a limitation here. Okay, so let's take as example our rule today. Even when we apply the peak method, we have issues with the tax authority regarding different understanding in some circumstances when we make a comparability adjustments. So that's a fact in our OECD level. So we can have an increase of this kind of discussion. And finally, the interpretation of the collected data. So note that we have different levels of interpretation. The consequence of that is that probably we have an increase of the litigation in transfer pricing. And we need to design instruments to solve quickly those disputes and also to avoid this kind of disputes. For that reason, we need to increase quickly the application of MAP. We have the MAP, the mutual agreement procedure. We have the MAP in Brazil since 2016. However, the application today is not so relevant. We do not have a relevant numbers, a relevant number of cases of MAP cases solved. APA.
Marcio, Marcio, my friend, I swear I could listen to you all day. Your experience and knowledge never ceases to amaze me. But if you don't mind interrupting a little bit, maybe we can save a little bit for Q&A. But we need to keep order to hand over to Francisco. So maybe I'll share a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, before I hand over to Francisco. Okay. I'm so sorry, Marcio.
2 minutes, 1 minute, 1 minute to conclude. And the APA, it's very important, okay, to avoid the litigation. And one important aspect, we need to increase the mutual confidence between taxpayer and Brazilian IRS. Without mutual confidence, we will not evaluate in APA and MAP and the other transfer pricing aspects regarding OECD process, considering, of course, transfer pricing issues. So basically, is that. So sorry for to use you 2 minutes more. And so Francisco, go ahead. I pass the word to you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Marcio. Before handing over to Francisco, I wanted to say a couple of words. First of all, good morning to everyone in the Americas. Good afternoon for those in Europe. I was checking up the names, and there are several people that I recognize joining from Europe. So, you know, special thanks for, you know, the interest. It's a real pleasure for me to be here mediating this event. The topic is hugely important for the investment climate in Brazil, and it's much more of a pleasure even to be doing so in the presence of you know, colleagues and friends. Some of these friends who I've shared papers in the past or shared panels in the past as well. Some of them too long ago of a past, but that's for another time. It was great to hear Marcio. As I said, you know, I could do that all day. But let me introduce Francisco. Our next speaker is Francisco Lisboa Moreira. I'll call him Chico. It's not only easier, but you know, speaking English, very Latin names. You know, it's kind of a mouthful. So Chico holds an LLM degree by NYU. He's a PhD candidate by USP, University of São Paulo. He's a researcher focusing on international taxation at FGV in São Paulo as well, and a guest lecturer for the IBDT. Chico is also a partner at Bocater's law firm, tax practice. And before I finally hand over to Chico, there's just a couple of provocations I must make to him, you know, maybe to spice up things a little bit. So Chico, I know you'll be talking a little bit more broadly about the potential accession of Brazil to the OECD. But I wanted to also bring it a little bit to TP, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on the manifest that reputed scholars published around trying to reconcile or accommodate domestic TP roles with those coming from the OECD environment. So that is my first bit of spice in there. And the second one is I wanted to understand, in your experience, And I mean, a lot of our viewers are representing foreigners or foreign investors in Brazil. And for most of them, if not for all of them, certainly for me, it's a point of interest. Stability and certainty plays a big role when it comes to investment. So I wanted to understand from your experience, when it comes to TP, what have you seen in that space, in that stability, certainty, and even the relationship between the fisc and taxpayers that Marcio alluded to? So without further ado, I'll finally hand over to Chico.
Well, the most sad word during this whole pandemic period is, gentlemen, you are muted. So I'm sorry about that. And starting over again, Fabio, thanks a lot for the kind words. And it's an honor to be here among such prestigious members of the tax committee. So, Fabio, commenting on your provocation before I start on my discussion, I do agree that when that manifest was published by Professor Chueri, Professor Sérgio André Rocha, Professor Heleno Torres, and Professor Romero Tavares, they were challenging the idea that Brazil would have to completely change its transfer pricing system in order to become a member of the OECD. And as Marcio Oliveira has just brilliantly explained, it is a process. This is an ongoing process. And the way I see it, it is more likely that it's a matter of changing culture, because the Brazilian tax authorities, they are extremely attached to the notion of legal certainty and to the notion that they can only apply adjustments and apply the transfer pricing legislation in accordance with the legislation and the normative instruction. And when we look into the transfer pricing guidelines, as Marcio explained, this is much more related to judgment and economic substance and judgment of the taxpayers. So we need necessarily to have a shift in the mentality, to have a shift in the way the Brazilian tax authorities operate. And this leads us also to the notion that in order to join the OECD, it is definitely not only about transfer pricing. As you said, we have the notion of legal certainty, and I can quote, for example, a recent judgment of the CAF. For those who are not Brazilian, the CAF is the Administrative Chamber for Fiscal Appeals. It is an administrative body that is composed equally by taxpayers and tax authorities, and where the cases, they have a much more technical rather than juridical evaluation. So with that regard, we do have, for example, a discussion regarding the resale price method and the 60% profit margin that was required until 2012. And we basically had two methods: the PRL, the resale price method for 20%, and the resale price method for 60%. The point is that you would jump from the 20% to the 60% basically because of a small inclusion in the price. The law never stated which level of local cost added to the product that was going to be resold would be sufficient to require the change from the resale price method with the 20% markup to the 60% markup. So the biggest point here is that companies which had to apply local legislation adjustments for, let's say, in order to attach Portuguese instructions to products that were going to be resold, or pharmaceutical companies, for instance, that needed to split a medicine into several batches. Situations like that, they would be sufficient to make the whole resale price profitability increase from the 20% to the 60%. And this created an amazing number of cases that are still pending today, over 10 years from that changing legislation. So this is an example of how we need legal certainty in the country, and the tax authorities, they need to trust the judgments of the taxpayers. It is going to require a huge shift in the mentality. And not only that, we need to take into consideration that we are talking about multinational companies that are subject to audit. It is always a big four company reviewing and internal audits and good governance practice. Those companies, they are not looking to pay the lesser amount of tax. They are looking to pay the right amount of tax. So this is going to require a significant change in the mentality, I would say, of taxpayers and the tax authorities. And as I said, it is not only about transfer pricing. I would also like to quote the recent change. Today, we've had a presidential decree that was published aiming to reduce our IOF, which is the financial transactions tax. This is a movement, as Marcio said, Brazil needs to improve its position on the freedom of capital movement and the economic liberty of the country. And I was researching this morning, and I saw that in 2010, Brazil intended to increase the IOF basically on the acquisition of foreign currency by Brazilian travelers. At the time, the devaluation of the real was not so huge. So all of us would love to travel overseas, to visit our beloved London, and to spend our vacation salaries traveling, and Brazilians love to do that. But Brazil was, the federal government was concerned about the huge negative impact in the balance of payments of the country. So they decided to increase our IOF rate from the time it was 1.1% to about 6.38% and this impacted I would say the freedom of capital movement, because it's not only the travelers, but for example, Brazilians who want to invest abroad, Brazilians who want to send their currency abroad, they are paying a higher tax. So Brazil is now considering this reduction, and the Minister of Finance, Minister Paulo Guedes, he has actually recently quoted that the intention is to completely repeal this IOF tax until 2028. So we need to see that this is a movement of the country that induces a behavior, and by increasing the IOF tax, in the past, it didn't have the purpose of increasing the collection of revenue by the federal government, but rather to induce a type of behavior. But then it is not only this type of behavior which was induced, but also it represents a significant source of revenue for the federal government. So we need to take this into consideration. It is going to be a difficult shift in the mentality of the federal government, because they need to replace that revenue source from different sources. And I would also like to add, for example, joining the OECD has its benefits. I always like to quote, for example, a paper of renewable economist Ottaviano Canuto. He wrote a paper in 2020 where he demonstrates through economic studies that countries which have joined the OECD, they may experience an annual growth in their GDP of approximately 0.4%. So for a country like Brazil, this would go as high as $7 billion as GDP growth. So we can see that there is a trade-off. So Brazil needs to understand that there will be a trade-off between the inflow of investments, the inflow of economic increase of the activity into the country, and the way they need to review their tax policy in order to repeal taxes that have been imposed in the past to induce certain types of behaviors, and nowadays they serve also as revenue collection sources. Another example that I like to quote is the national subsidies that are given to Brazilian industries. Please, Brazilian audience, do not throw the rocks on me, but the Brazilian industry needs to understand how to survive without the IPI benefits that they have, in which the foreign products, when they are assembled elsewhere and imported into Brazil, they might face. So, for example, talking about equality of conditions between the non-resident service provider and the Brazilian resident provider, we are all aware of the huge burden, for example, when we have to import services. So we do have the income withholding tax, in which Brazil, in most of its treaties, does not understand technical services as are under the scope of Article 7, for example. So we need to pay withholding income tax. We need to pay the CIDE, which is a 10% tax. We need to pay PIS and COFINS tax, which is also something extremely relevant because it was imposed based on an equality between the foreign service provider and the Brazilian provider. But the foreign service provider cannot take the credits of PIS and COFINS, which the local service provider would be able to. So this imposition of taxes brings us to the necessity of changing culture. And we have elections this year. It is impossible not to mention that the Brazilian ascension into the OECD will take into consideration significant inputs from the next president, whomever this president might be. So as tax practitioners, as tax advisors, we need to always take that into consideration. And we need always not only to take that into consideration, but to always understand the rationale underneath each new changing legislation. So there are several other tax areas that need a significant shift. I can quote our consumption taxes system, our CFC rules, our sourcing concepts, because in Brazil, most of the source concepts are lying on the payments, remittance, and not only the production sourcing, which is used for most OECD members. The adoption of the mutual agreement procedures, as Marcio mentioned. So there are several other tax areas where we need a significant shift in policy, and where this shift in policy requires a change in culture, which might take a long time to be implemented, especially because the tax authorities in Brazil, I don't know how long since the last public concurso público, I don't even know how to say that in English, but when it was the last time between the Receita Federal has hired new tax inspectors, and which was the last time where they have been trained in this different changing culture, which we need to have for the upcoming years if we are going to decide to join the OECD. So without advancing further on time, I would like to thank again for the opportunity, and I'm available to discuss in the Q&A the questions of the others. Thank you.
Thanks, Chico. Yes, so as we had planned, we have a few minutes for Q&A. So I see already have one question from the audience. Let's use the next couple of minutes to, raise curiosity and further questions. I'll start with this one. But one thing that I would also like to see is I made a couple of provocations to Chico. And in order not to put only himself on the spotlight, I would like to hear Marcio's thoughts on those issues as well. I mean, if he has thoughts on the manifest published by the professors that were cited by Chico, and also on legal certainty. And then I'll move to João Almeida's question.
Marcio, you are muted.
Marcio, thoughts?
About the level of certainty, okay. System, however, isn't possible to say that lawyers using create.
Sorry, Marcio, I believe Fabio would like to address first with you the points he made with Chico about the manifest from the scholars arguing that TP in Brazil would not have to change so much.
So that's an interesting point, because one aspect that I'm always thinking about this OECD movement is that we do not have relevant studies about the possible implication from economic perspectives. So how much we would increase in tax collection, and how many points of GDP we would increase. So it would be very useful if we had a study, for instance, comparing Brazil with Mexico and Chile experience. So what's happened with those countries after ascent to the OECD? It's better, it's not good. For instance, in Mexico, so in the past, so I had the opportunity to talk with some Mexico tax inspectors and some Mexican professors, and they told that to the Mexico was not so relevant the ascension to the OECD, because for Maquila institute, how we can say that, would not create value and wealth to the Mexican country, to the Mexico people. From an economic perspective, we have a concentration of revenue in the top of the pyramid, but we do not distribute revenue. However, to Chile, we probably would have a different perception, okay, than Mexico. So it'd be very useful if you had something in this direction, because Brazil, as I said, is the top 10 economy in the world, and this movement would be more studied before the ascension. We hear frequently some opinions, perceptions, but what we have from an empirical and a statistical, what kind of empirical and statistical conclusion we have? In my opinion, we have a lack about this.
Thanks, Marcio. So now move on to João's question, and if there are other questions from the audience, please type them in the chat box. So João's question, basically I'll summarize as putting the issue from the following perspective. So the lack of certainty may have to do with jurisprudence and the fact that we have a, I'll say a tough judicial system, but he argues maybe could that lack of certainty could also be related to the creativity or added creativity from lawyers in creating theses for the application and benefit of their clients. That is a real good provocation. Yeah,
Fabio,
Gustavo?
if I may, I'd like to have a shot at this one. I understand where João is coming from. In my point of view, the lack of certainty comes from the amount of change in tax legislation that takes place in Brazil so frequently. And this change in tax legislation always entails opportunity to interpretation of the tax law that has been publicized, has been made public. And in that regard, if there is room for interpreting that the tax administration's understanding of the tax law naturally leading to higher tax revenue and higher tax burden can be challenged in courts, and if the courts accept that interpretation is wrong, it's illegal and unconstitutional, I think it's a matter of common sense that the application of tax law that is illegal and unconstitutional as decided by the courts should no longer exist. So I guess the problem is not the creativity of the lawyers. I'd say the problem is the creativity of the legislative body and the executive body creating change on tax laws in Brazil so frequently as they do. That's my take on it.
Very good, Gustavo. Maybe I'll add a provocation to turn around as well. Maybe lawyers are creative, but can we argue that tax inspectors can be creative as well in interpreting tax law? So I think Gustavo touched on a broader level, tax policy, and then how tax policy is applied is often between the tax inspectors or the taxpayers. So what is the tax inspector's role in that creativity? Is there any? So maybe for Marcio and Francisco and Chico to comment.
Fabio, so I'd like to complement what Gustavo said. So I think that the tax uncertainty is something that we have around the world. All countries have tax uncertainty in different levels. I think the main point here is how fast we will solve the controversy and the dispute. Because if we solve this quickly and we create a good precedent, a good jurisprudence, we will create a good, how can I say, a círculo virtuoso, a secret of a good issue, good jurisprudence, create good new precedents, and we solve it quickly the new litigation or the new controversy. So I think that we need to keep focus also, okay, in how to solve this quickly and with quality. Of course, as Gustavo said, we need to improve we need to review and simplify the number of rules. We need to change the tax authority mindset. It's very important. But and in addition of that, we need to create elements and instruments to solve it quickly. The dependence regarding controversy and litigation.
Good point. Yeah, late justice is not justice.
Yeah.
With that, maybe Chico, have you seen recent developments where you've seen, creativity coming from tax inspectors in infraction notices and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, this is a very important point because I don't know how many, there are many people in the audience who are tax practitioners, and I would like to invite them for a reflection. I always like to bring this joke with my name. The stick which hits Francisco is the stick which hits Chico as well. We have to be consistent with both sides of the coin. So in this case, when a tax practitioner tries to be creative, it depends on the level of the, let's say, a concept which is familiar to everyone, effective tax rate, and effective tax burden of Brazilian companies operating here. Everyone loves to say that Brazil has a 0% withholding tax rate on dividends, but we always forget that we have a 34% effective tax rate on corporate income tax and which the OECD members is at 23%. But our consumption taxation and indirect taxation as of today is among the highest of the world. And Brazil does not provide social and public returns like Denmark or Sweden. So the main point here is that we need to be creative in order to allow businesses to survive. Because for certain businesses, it is important to operate in a scenario where the business model, which was made 5 years ago to operate in Brazil, cannot be changed by a law of Rio de Janeiro state, which is my home state, for example, increasing the rate of the ICMS FACP, for example, an additional ICMS rate, and to increase the methodology of substituição tributária, which is an anticipation of collection of the VAT, or a change to bring the discussion to another economic sector, which is extremely important to the state of Rio, for example, which is the oil and gas system. And we cannot change the rules which were created 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and which based the inflow of foreign investment into the country, and that have mixed up the economic conditions. So sometimes there is a new law coming, which is going to change the existing economic scenario, and which will require a whole set of judicial claims and legal actions to sustain the existing level of tax burden, which is already high. So this is a reflection that I would like to bring. Of course, people are going to look at me and say, you are sustaining the taxpayer sides, but sometimes this is the most needed approach in order to allow businesses to survive. And in joining the OECD, this has also to be taken into consideration.
No, I was on mute. Thanks, Chico. I really like what you said before, that multinationals don't want to pay less tax. They want to pay the right tax. Just a process check. We are over time, but we decided to extend for some extra 10 minutes for those of you in the audience that can hold on with us. Anyway, this recording will be available at the BCC website. So if you happen to miss, you can always go back there and check. Within ourselves, we made a commitment for a few extra minutes so that we can cover the 2 remaining questions plus a few closing remarks. So the next question is, in general consideration, let's try to make this a yes or no question or answer in this case. In general consideration, is it a good thing or a bad thing for Brazil to accede to the OECD?
In my opinion, it is a great opportunity for Brazil to join the OECD, because this is going to require a reduction in the tax burden. But even if we have this reduction in the tax burden, the revenue collection from the public authorities is going to be increased by the increase of the economic inflow. So it is a cyclical movement that is going to keep the country increasing the right track, my opinion.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Chico. If I may, perhaps Marcio, would you mind replying to the next one so we can have a more diverse approach? So Marcio, okay. Do you believe that OECD would be open to accept Brazil without substantial alignment between the local TP legislation and OECD?
So I have a particular opinion about that. So I think that so we work with tax, almost everybody here. So the tendency that is that we make tax we fix tax with something very relevant. In fact, very relevant. But the OECD essential process is not related to tax. We have many other aspects: education, health, governance, corruption, etc., etc., etc. So I think if Brazil find a middle term between the arm's length principle and the model that we have today, probably OECD will accept. I think that is not an issue. Okay, I think that's the first moment if Brazil have the commitment to move to the arm's length principle. So it be very important. We need to have a pragmatic point of view here. The Brazilian IRS invested a lot of time and money to create a system to control the transfer pricing and for a distance. Okay, today it's possible based on the information that the tax authority has. The tax authority is able to make a previous assessment and have red flags and yellow flag there regarding some taxpayer and starting a process of inspection. When we move to the model equivalent to the OECD, the tax authority will lose part of these weapons. That's a reality. Okay, I think that's the first moment the tax authority will try to find something that combine both words. Okay, but in my opinion, so TP is relevant, but if we find a middle term, it's not an issue to the Brazilian accession to the OECD. Okay.
Thanks, Marcio. With that, I would like to thank our speakers and move to our closing words with Luis Felipe and Mariana.
Thank you, Fabio. It's really hard to say something after everything has been said here. It's a lot. But one thing that comes to my mind every time that I talk about OECD accession, and as Marcio said, there are many things, and Chico also said the same thing. We have many things to comply with, to enroll with the OECD, and with respect to the taxes, transfer pricing is always the talk of the town, but of course we have many other things like IOF and other things, and this is very much something. But what really strikes me is the litigation that we have in our country, and this is something for the OECD also. First of all, because from the perspective of the courts themselves, we have the uncertainty that we know. Sometimes here in Brazil, we say that even the past is uncertain. And that's true, because even for the past, we don't know what is going to happen, and that's really confusing, and that's very confusing for investors. And I think Mariana can say something about the perspective of the investors. But this is something that we have to discuss this, and it's something that is very intangible when it comes to Brazil going to OECD, because it's part of our culture. And the second thing is, when we address this thing, one thing that has to be changed is I'm sorry for saying that, but it is the profile of tax authorities. I know that we have been very much attacked as lawyers and taxpayers, but the profile of tax authorities, it has to be changed. And I think transfer price is the brightest example in this respect. Transfer pricing, which is something for us with the OECD, is something for, let's say, the northern countries, the northern hemisphere, because here in the south, it's all about litigation. In Europe or in US, you go after the tax authorities, you discuss your transfer pricing with them, the prices, you discuss the standards with them, and then you practice that. That avoids litigation. In Brazil, we don't do that. We do our thing and we wait for an assessment, and then we go to courts to have it discussed by the judges that don't even know what it's all about, because it's a financial, it's less about taxes and more about financial discussion. So we need to change our culture. That's what I would like to bring. It's more than just changing the legislation and adapting ourselves to OECD, but it's changing our culture here in Brazil. Because if we don't change the culture, it's only going to be we're only going to have words on paper, and this is it.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those in the UK. I mean, Luis was totally right. I don't know if I have anything to add here, because it was such a rich debate, and I also would like to thank the Brazilian Chamber for giving us the opportunity and space to talk about tax issues, and the audience for making very good questions about the matter that we are discussing here. Trying to give just a little bit of a business perspective, or as a professional, a practical professional tax in Brazil, we have the tax burden issue very present in a daily basis, because even though we have sorry, I was trying to make a line of rational, and it went away. But anyways, as a professional in Brazil, it is impossible not to dream about Brazil joining OECD, because in Brazil, I don't know if I know we have a lot of British audience here, but Brazil, in the last World Bank report regarding doing business in 2019, Brazil was the country that requires the most time for tax calculation. And that's one of the costs that we also have, besides the tax burden that is also very heavy in Brazil. So that's for me, Brazil entering OECD is quite important, not also for freedom, economic freedom, for our fiscal health, but also because we have to hire large tax teams. We have to spend money on softwares to try to give the right information and collect the right taxes for the tax authorities, for the government. And most of the time we don't succeed on that, because it's very confusing. It's always changing. We have the judicial sphere that also brings some difficulties for us in this side of the table. So I mean, for me, that's the last comment that I would like to say, that I think Chico mentioned that even though the tax burden, the tax collect from the government may reduce, may decrease, on the other side, we will be able to make so much new trades, international trades, make the foreign investors comfortable and make them willing to make business with Brazil, because of the facility that we will give them, that we don't give them today nowadays. So that's my closing remarks. I think that everything here is a golden circle that we could join, that we could have joining OECD, even though not that much of a hope that we have that we reach all the requires, but I think it will be very important for Brazil.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you for sharing with us the views from a practitioner engaged in huge investment in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil. And thank you, Luis, for highlighting the fact that as a wrap-up, OECD accession shall not only bring changes to Brazilian tax law, but a change of culture. And thank you so much to our panelists, Chico and Marcio. It's been great. Thank you, Fabio, for the mediation. Thank you all for joining us. We're running a bit late, of course, but using Fabio's words, I could be here today, the whole day as well, with such a learned team and such a fantastic discussion. So with that said, thank you to those that have endured with us. I hope it has been informative and useful. Look forward to having you all on the next event, next webinar or seminar of the Tax Committee of the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain. See you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.